I'm sure you've all heard of EMDR, but have you heard of Brainspotting? Because we have trauma therapist Janet Bayramyan chatting about how Brainspotting can be used to process traumatic memories, regulate your nervous system, and tap into feelings of resilience and expansion in a more gentle way than most other trauma modalities. Listen in as she talks about her experience and how transformative Brainspotting has been for herself and her clients. If you're new here, you're listening to the How We Get Thru podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations with healers from all over the world. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Thru app. My mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Thru community. Hello, and welcome back to the How We Get Thru podcast. We have another exciting episode today. We're going back into the therapist mode. We have Janet Bayramyan on. She is a trauma therapist from LA. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we were talking before, and I was very honest, and I am like, I know nothing about Brainspotting, so I'm excited to learn so much about it. But I would also love to know more about you. Why did you get into this field? And then trauma sounds like followed you, or you kind of dived into it. What's been your path with that?
Well, in short, I can just say that I'm a survivor myself. I've experienced my own traumatic history and needed to do my own therapy. I still do my own therapy to work through a lot of things. And so I feel like because I've gone through, my own traumatic experiences, I feel so empathetic and almost like called to work with survivors myself. So that's what really, led me to this specific niche. And, I kind of also fell in love with the different models that I work with to support trauma survivors. Like, I know we're going to talk about Brainspotting today. I also do EMDR, IFS therapy. So, I love all these models too. So I feel like my journey into trauma recovery has been so parallel to not only my own experiences, but my experiences as a professional.
What came first for you? Were you wanting to get certified in EMDR? Or were you like, I want to try this out as a client first? And you're like, I love this? Or, I'm sure it can go many ways.
Yeah. So I was, I didn't know about Brainspotting for a long time. I had heard more so about EMDR. I feel like EMDR is just way more well-known by both the therapist community and by just people in general. And luckily, when I was, still in my early phase of being a therapist, I had a supervisor that was EMDR trained that talked to me about it. So it definitely piqued my interest at the time. And I definitely first, before I committed to the training, I made sure to receive EMDR therapy as a client. And I was the biggest skeptic. I was like, how is moving eyes gonna heal me? What is this? This is so weird. I was very much like that, like very much a skeptic. But when I worked with my therapist using the EMDR, I just instantly felt so different. I'm not saying that it made everything go away right away, but it made my nervous system feel so much better, and that's similarly to what happens with Brainspotting as well. So yeah, at that point I drank the Kool-Aid and I was all in with these different somatic therapies.
And havening, you also do havening, right?
Yes, I got trained in havening techniques as well many years ago, and I like to utilize that model as well.
Can you just mention what havening is? I feel like we're tapping in all of the trauma modalities, and then we'll go into Brainspotting.
So the havening techniques, it's a model that was developed in the UK and brought here to the US, and it's not traditional talk therapy. Any of the therapies that we're going to talk about today is not really traditional talk therapy, but havening is a psychosensory modality that utilizes a specific touch called the havening touch to essentially help soothe the nervous system when somebody is working through processing their trauma. There's a specific kind of thing that, we do with the specific type of touch to produce delta waves so that when you are working with a therapist to process either trauma or just maybe like a distressing thing, anxiety, panic attack, anything like that, it helps to teach you how to regulate your nervous system as you're performing the havening touch on yourself, or if a
Yeah.
therapist is performing the havening touch on you.
I love that one because it is like so empowering for the self, like
Yeah.
and something that you can always come back to, which is really great.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense. I mean, we think about like with babies, babies want to be held and nurtured and gently touched and caressed. And I'm thinking to myself, well, so do adults. Adults need that too.
Yes, we all need that soothing touch for sure. Okay, so we have havening, we have EMDR. Is there another? What can't you do, Janet?
I do brain spotting, and then I'm also trained in internal family systems level 1, and I love that model also. I actually tend to combine IFS with either EMDR, combine IFS with brain spotting. I really love all these models.
I mean, I think that's the art of being a therapist too, is, once you get in it, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things and so many ways to approach healing, right? So you become like this magician, like this master of like taking things from here, putting it there, and tailoring it to the client, essentially. Okay, so have you done brain spotting on yourself?
I haven't quite done it on myself. I think some brain spotters do. But similarly to my EMDR journey, once I learned about the power of brain spotting, I decided I needed to first be the client with brain spotting first, see how that felt, and then if it resonated for me, then I would sign up for the training. And sure enough, it did. I felt so much more calm and much more soothed when I was the client in a brain spotting session. So I knew, okay, this is something that I have to incorporate in my work with clients.
What do you think shifted for you? First, okay, let's just talk about brain spotting. What is it?
Yes. So brain spotting, essentially, it was developed by a psychologist. His name is David Grand. He was an EMDR therapist at first. And so with EMDR, maybe your audience knows, but when we process trauma with EMDR, we utilize something called bilateral stimulation, either with back and forth eye movements or back and forth self-tapping or back and forth sounds in the ears to kind of get you to a deeper part in your brain so that you can reprocess traumatic experiences, traumatic memories. He was in a session with a client. He works with a lot of sports athletes that want to improve their sports performance. She was an ice skater, and for whatever reason, she couldn't accomplish the triple axel, I think it is what it was. He was doing EMDR with her, I think on one of her memories of like a really bad fall. And what ended up happening is instead of her eyes moving back and forth, her eyes fixated on a specific spot. We now know that's called a brain spot. And so he just kind of went with it with her. He didn't try to fix it or correct her. He just let her eyes focus on the spot. And she, from what, I heard about this story, is she was able to really move deep inside herself to, uncover a lot of the pain of that moment and to work through what she needed to work through to be able to accomplish that triple axel that she needed to accomplish. And from there, what he found is that we all have different spots that when we look at it, we either can connect to kind of an activated experience, or we can also connect to maybe a spot that makes us feel a little bit more calm, makes us feel a little bit more positive, makes us feel a little bit more neutral. So with brain spotting, essentially when we're, let's say, processing trauma, processing a distressing life event, we find a brain spot that helps us connect to the activation that we feel in our bodies, helps us feel the activation in the limbic system of our brain where a lot of our emotions are stored. And we can help ourselves by reprocessing it that way. I think personally, it's a very gentle way to process trauma. I love EMDR. I'm not saying EMDR isn't powerful, but if I could personally choose between being a client with EMDR or being a client with Brainspotting, I much prefer Brainspotting because I feel like it's just so gentle. And we need that when we process traumatic experiences.
Okay, I'm having a flashback and I'm like, maybe I do know brain spotting. Because
Yeah, tell me.
when I was in school, I remember, obviously, but they brought someone up. They're like, okay, are you okay sharing a traumatic story? You know, all the things. Super traumatic informed. But anyway, she was talking about a car crash and he had color wands. He had multiple wands that
Mm-hmm.
had colors on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say, okay, where did you get hit? Like, what side was it? She's like, okay, the right side. And then he started the wands and like would move them around her head. And she's like, right there. Is that the same thing?
That sounds like brain spotting to me. It's like finding the spot where you can really remember
Like
that memory or that experience, that visceral experience. Yes.
yes. You know, it's interesting too. I think um, as women, I'm wondering if we can relate to that a little bit more or connect to that a little bit more. I just think I think from my own experience, like hyper vigilant of like people around, spaces around us.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was like coordinating a wedding back in the day, and this really tall groomsman like came up and like was in my space, and he's like the most gentle, beautiful person. But I remember being like, whoa, you
Yeah.
need to back up. And I'm not that type of person. And so it's just interesting as you talk about brain spotting, where we can connect to almost like this energetic field that we have around us. As soon as it's like back into that memory, it does it have a visceral feeling in your body? What's the reaction that most people have?
Well, for me personally, let's say I need to work through something and I can remember, I often ask people like, what's the worst part of that experience? What was the worst moment of that experience? That usually helps people tap into, what they feel physically, that might tap into maybe their PTSD response. Maybe they felt frozen in the moment, or maybe they felt heightened reactivity in the moment. So yeah, I think it's really important to kind of notice what your body is going through when you remember something or, when you're trying to work through something.
And so once you have the wand like in place of the memory, is that where you're now processing or reprocessing the trauma? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. So I have the wand, right? So
Mhm.
let's say you're my client and let's say, Jen, you tell me, okay, I want to work on that memory you talked about with the event planning. And then I'm going to ask you when that worst part happened, let's find your brain spot. Where do you feel more activated? And then I'll have you kind of go through the screen to see where you feel activated. Let's say you feel more activated here. Essentially, all you would do is bring your awareness to this spot right over here and just notice what you feel. Notice what you feel in your body. Notice if there's any other thoughts, other memories that come up. Notice if there are any core beliefs that come up. And we just go with it. It's so different from regular talk therapy because in talk therapy, I'm kind of considered like the authority in the room. I kind of lead you, ask you a lot of questions in talk therapy. But in brain spotting, you're the leader, you're the expert. Your brain is the expert in the room, and your brain is the one telling me what it needs.
For people that are listening, Janet was holding a wand, like just like a rod, basically, and moved it side to side in front of her. And it was interesting. So on the right side, I was like, oh, that's it.
Okay.
And it is, you can kind of like feel that, which is just so interesting.
Yes. What did you feel in your body?
Like I wanted to move away.
Yeah.
And a little like I got to fight, a little tense.
Yeah. So if we were to work on that, I would have you just kind of hold it there. And if you needed to move away, I could maybe move back a little bit to make the processing a little bit more supportive for you. Or if, let's say, you needed to physically move back, you could do that. And then we would work through that fight response that you noticed.
I love this because this has a lot of like somatic work in it and your brain
Yes.
and EMDR. It's like three of them combined.
Yeah. Yeah. Very similar.
In some way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what trauma, or what's the best, I'm gonna say best, but who is brain spotting good for? Like, is it good for anxiety, or is it good for just like processing a big event? Who would come for brain spotting?
It's good for all of that. It's good for, like, if you're going to work with David Grand, he works with a lot of athletes. It's great for athletes that want to work through traumatic injuries. Also athletes that want to improve their performance. It's good for trauma. It's good for anxiety. It's good for depression. It's good for dissociation. I can't really think of a population that wouldn't benefit from utilizing brain spotting. It's really just more so how open you are to it. Because again, I'm very, transparent. Have been very skeptic of all of these models. So I feel like if you're skeptical, that's okay, but just give it a shot to see how it feels and how it works for you. But I think it can benefit a lot of people.
So in your practice, do you is brain spotting like a separate thing and they just come for you for brain spotting, or is it something you do in a therapy session?
I do it. Like I said, not as many people know about brain spotting as well as they know about EMDR. So somebody might come in and say, I'm really interested in EMDR therapy. I would say, great, we can do EMDR. And then I would also introduce brain spotting to see if you might be interested or if you might like it. But brain spotting, they don't have to be separate sessions. I encourage people to try it. But if, let's say, you're someone that just wants to talk first, by all means, please talk. And then if I feel like brain spotting would benefit some of the content that you're talking about, or would benefit in helping you feel better, then I'll definitely introduce it.
Because I would imagine there obviously needs to be rapport on some level and maybe some resourcing before diving into brain spotting for the trauma, or does it feel you don't have to be as resourced?
Yeah, well, so rapport, yes. I always want to have a good rapport with the clients that I work with. I always want to feel like you trust me, you feel safe with me. As far as being resourced, actually with this model, you don't need to do as much resourcing as you would with EMDR, because brain spotting is also considered to be not only a neuro-experiential model, but a highly resourced model. Also, because let's say, Jen, we were holding that activated spot for you, and let's say you tell me, you know what, like this feels like too much, or maybe, I can't hold this spot any longer. I would grab the pointer and say, okay, let's find where you feel more calm or neutral. And we would actually bring you to a more resource spot. And just have you focus on that until, your body and your nervous system felt a little bit more regulated in the moment. And then we could go back to the activation.
That makes a lot of sense. That does feel gentle. Like it's,
yes.
It's like, I don't know what I'm saying, but like a lifesaver in the, like, okay, you want to get off the boat? Let's get off the boat. You ready to go back on? We can go on. Like we're not moving. We're not in the middle of the ocean. Everything is right there. So I like that idea of the safety of it all.
Absolutely.
And the client being in control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What is happening in the brain? Like how is this working just by looking at a spot?
That's a good question. So when a client is attuned to what we call their brain spot, we're moving into what's called the subcortical part of the brain. So let's kind of compare it to talk therapy. in talk therapy, you gain a lot of insight. A lot of clients report that they, learn more about themselves, right? But when it comes to trauma, talk therapy usually doesn't make them feel better. Insight doesn't always make you feel better in your body, in your nervous system. So with talk therapy, we stay in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. With brain spotting, we move into the subcortical, we move into the limbic system of the brain, we move into even parts of the brainstem to, again, identify what emotions are maybe still stored. Oftentimes clients will tell me, I've started with this memory, but now like this other memory is coming up, and they had no idea that these memories were linked and were impacted with each other. So we're kind of moving into those deeper areas of the brain to really support that resolution. It's not necessarily about insight. It's more so what neurologically needs to happen to bring the brain back to a state of homeostasis.
So again, more of the body response, flight, fight, freeze. That's the kind of thing that you're targeting essentially to regulate.
Yes.
Do you feel, I want to go back to havening. Does it feel like havening is a little bit more of like, again, just kind of like a resource, like I need to regulate. And brain spotting is like, here's our trauma, let's regulate the trauma?
Yes and no. I mean, I do know that with havening, you can process trauma as well, but it's a little bit different. Havening does a really good job of tapping into what's being held in our amygdala and working through, that cortisol that gets released when we're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn state. So I know a lot of people consider havening to be like, this is just about like soothing the body, but I do know with havening, you can process traumatic events as well using the specific havening touch and some of the havening protocols that are available.
So what have you seen? Like, can you give us some examples of what you've seen in your practice with brain spotting that you feel like EMDR didn't touch, or that havening didn't touch, or like what are you seeing in clients? Obviously, don't give me away details, but like,
yeah,
give us some deets, or in your certification too.
Here's kind of what I've noticed. I still practice all of these models. I personally prefer brain spotting, but if a client comes in and says, no, I only want to do EMDR, we'll do EMDR. But here's what I notice. Sometimes with EMDR, it can be a lot for a client to kind of re-experience a specific traumatic memory, or they'll kind of hit a point and then, might hit a wall and we might be stuck in a particular area. There are some methods to work with that with EMDR. So I'm not saying that, an EMDR therapist would necessarily stop EMDR if something like that were to happen. But those are kind of the points where if I feel like the reaction is just so heightened and a lot for the client, I might say like, why don't we try brain spotting for this? And so I'll transition to brain spotting to see if it just feels a little bit more gentle for the client to work through. EMDR requires a lot of preparation, a lot of resourcing, a lot of assessments and doing all of that. Brain spotting does require assessments, does require rapport building, but does not require as much preparation. We can kind of go into the memories and into the experiences a lot sooner than with EMDR. So I feel like in terms of what I've noticed with clients, especially the clients that can kind of like just really go into it, what often they tell me is, wow, this memory, I haven't thought about this memory in like 30 years. I don't know why this memory is coming up. And it's coming up because, again, your brain is the expert in the room, and your brain is saying, we need to revisit this so that we can really heal right now. I hear that a lot with brain spotting. I hear, like they'll find a brain spot and they'll, just notice themselves being teary. And a client might say, I'm feeling so teary. I didn't really even know that I had these tears within me. So it's just a lot of things that need to likely come to the surface, or things that need to be released start to really come forward is what I've noticed with brain spotting.
And that could be like if somebody has like a relationship wound currently, like in their relationship, it doesn't have to be super past trauma. Like, I mean, it's all probably connected, but
yeah, I mean, everyone, like, we can work on stuff that's happening now that is bothering you. We can work on stuff from the past. We can work on even just like a general feeling that you're wanting to work on. There is also a part of brain spotting, a trainer, her name is Lisa Larson. This is who I trained with brain spotting. She also does a type of brain spotting therapy called expansion, where that's not about trauma. That's not about, rehashing what happened in the past that was painful. It's about, expansion in your heart, expansion in the best possibilities out there for you. So it's more like if you want to manifest something in your life, or if you want to build on like a positive feeling, we find what's called the expansion spot, and, have the client focus on that so that we can bring in all of those really good feelings for the nervous system and the body. So there's also that flip side to brain spotting too.
Yeah. Do you have to have all your trauma sorted out before you do that?
No, not at all.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think the manifesting, there's so many things out there. And manifesting sometimes it's a little too pop culture-y for me. In any pop culture it's like, this is how you manifest in 3 steps, but it's like so much bigger than that. But part of it is that physical feeling like you already have that and what changes. So I love that idea of expansion. And again, what I think you're tapping into is that the nervous system, like both exists in the nervous system, the trauma, but also the resilience.
Yes.
And that brain spotting kind of moves through them seamlessly, which is a reminder to the client, like this exists in your body, but also this exists in your body, and that you can kind of concentrate on either.
Absolutely. And I can actually share a story that, again, Lisa Larson, my trainer, talked about when she talked about expansion, where she was working with a client with really bad suicidal thoughts. Like he was just not in a good place. And his gaze, he kept on focusing like below him, somewhere down here. And he just kept on going deeper and deeper into that dark place when it came to suicidal thoughts. So she had him shift, actually, and she said, "You know what? Let's find a different spot for you. Tell me if you can find a spot where you're going to be okay." And so he found that spot, and the spot might have been like somewhere above him, somewhere like that. And he just focused on that in session for quite some time. And I remember her saying that really shifted things for him, that even though, like you said, he had that part of him that was struggling with suicidal ideation, he also had a part of him that he could tap into that was more resilient, that knew he was going to be okay, that knew he was going to get through that dark time in his life. So yeah, we need to have that too.
Which I think like maybe that should be the marketing. Although people want to obviously heal their pain, but it's, I'm just thinking how interesting that would be if we're marketing expansion. I mean, it sounds like she does, right? But this, like, what if all, like tapping into all the possibilities of self, like how powerful that can be. Because I think a lot of us are trying, especially I think now, like everyone's trying to manifest and do this and find their power and all these things. But when we have these beliefs of ourselves that are underneath, I think that's what it can also tap into is like, well, what do you really believe of yourself? And how do we kind of heal that so that you can actually get the things that you want and need and deserve in this life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important to touch on both, because I feel like, and I can speak to this because I'm a survivor myself. I feel like sometimes my brain focuses so heavily on the negative and what's not going well or what's wrong, but I have to remember too that no, like I have experiences of resiliency, I have experiences of positivity, and I can look at that and tap into that too, in addition to just recognizing and honoring my pain.
Yes, yes. So in that, like, for example, for that client, could he do that on his own, like look up to where the spot is resilience and almost like create a ritual out of it or a meditation or like something that he can then like call upon when he needs it?
That certainly is a possibility. Because the thing with brain spotting is that when you're, let's say, thinking about something, like this is what I tell everybody to do if you're skeptical about brain spotting. When you're thinking about something, whether it's trauma or just something else, let's say, notice where you look. We kind of all naturally look somewhere. And Jen, you're a therapist. When you're sitting with your clients, as they're maybe sharing their story or talking about things, just notice where they look. Like clients will typically look in a particular direction when they're talking about something. So yes, we can kind of focus on a particular spot if that's the spot that feels natural to us. I will say, there's a caveat, you have to make sure you feel comfortable and safe doing so on your own. If not, then definitely bring it, with your therapist that you're working with. But I will say, if you can tap into that expansion, or you can tap into, all right, this is my resilient spot, you can bring your gaze there and just notice how you feel, even if it's just for like a couple minutes, and almost make it like a meditative experience.
That's what I love about that. Like, I'm trying to meditate here, but it's very hard, very difficult. But it's almost like tapping into your own power and like reminder of that. Again, I think of it like as energy, like, it's like your spot of energy of like this remembrance of who you are. There might be many spots of that. It might not just be one, but I think that can also be super helpful. We need to process trauma, or we get to process trauma, but that there's also this beautiful side of expansion. Man, I love that word. That's so cool.
Yeah. It's amazing. If you're a therapist listening to this and you want to try brain spotting, definitely you'll want to do phase 1 to get the foundation. But I highly recommend the expansion training by Lisa Larson, because it's amazing. It's just truly, again, so much of trauma work, like we're focusing on how to heal the PTSD, focusing on, I guess what we would call negativity, the challenges, but we forget to focus on everyone's internal resiliency that we all have. So I highly recommend phase 1 for the foundation, and then also expansion.
And is there like a phase? How many phases of training are there? Just those?
No. So there's 4 phases. Phase 1 and phase 2 are like the main foundational skills of brain spotting. Phase 3 and phase 4 are just if you want to kind of expand on your learning with different types of brain spotting frames. There's expansion. There's all kinds of brain spotting trainings. There's brain spotting in working with first responders. There's brain spotting working with couples. There's so many that you can find online. But I would say if you want the main foundational tools, phase 1, phase 2, and then expansion is a very awesome training as well.
Awesome. And with your clients, it sounds like with brain spotting, there's just a little bit of intro, like it's not as much as EMDR. There's no phases for them in that regard.
Right. No phases For clients, like the different phases of trainings, it's just more so for the therapist to
Right.
get the tools and feel comfortable with this model. But with clients, it's mainly just about building the rapport, like having your client feel comfortable with you. You can explain brain spotting if you want to. Sometimes people will have questions about it. And then asking the client, so what's important really to work on? What feels necessary in your life now? And then we can jump into brain spotting. We can jump into finding, the activation or finding where you feel more calm and resourced. And you can, the therapist changes it up. I change it up all the time depending on what's happening with my client in the rooms. So that's where the foundational skills can be very helpful for you. So the training is really good. But as far as like walking clients through different phases, that's not as much necessary with the brain spotting model versus some other models.
So it sounds like you interweave it with therapy. So it would be just within that session, right? It wouldn't be a separate session, or do some people do separate sessions?
Some people do separate sessions. I mean, I want to make sure we have enough time. So if we do like a couple of minutes of talking at the beginning, I'm okay with that. And then transitioning to brain spotting. But if we've talked, let's say for like 40 minutes, and then the client says, I think I want to give brain spotting a try, I would probably move it to the next session because we would only have 10 minutes for brain spotting. I think the only time I would allow for brain spotting that short of a time is if I knew the client's brain just processes very quickly. Otherwise, I think it would be, supportive and important to make sure we have enough time for it.
Well, when you said the client's brain processes quickly, how are some brains processing quickly and some slowly? Is that from trauma or is it biological? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, every person's brain is different. Every person's brain processes things at its own pace, processes things differently. I get that question a lot. Like people with both EMDR and brain spotting, people will ask me, how many sessions am I going to need of this? And I tell people, I wish I could tell you, but I haven't met you yet and I don't know how your brain processes. So the general response that I give is that if, let's say, in general, your childhood was really positive, you had supportive family, you weren't isolated or neglected, you didn't really go through maybe much trauma, maybe things happened, but, you had that support in your life, likely you won't need as many sessions because your brain is able to process through things and it's likely not going to be a challenge for you. But if it's on the flip side, if let's say you have gone through a lot of trauma, since childhood, let's say maybe you didn't have as many supports, or maybe the supports were sort of on and off, not consistent. If you've experienced neglect, things like that, anything almost like attachment related, I often tell people we likely will just need more time for either EMDR or brain spotting. We'll likely just need some more sessions, but that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or wrong with your brain. We're just going to go at your pace, but likely it's not going to be one of those like we're going to work through a memory in 2 sessions. It'll likely take some more time and we'll figure out what your pace is when you come in.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense of, when someone comes in like, this is my problem. How fast can we get through this? Or how many sessions? Yeah. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know because I don't know you and I don't know what we're going up against. So, or what we're going through. So
yeah, totally.
That makes sense. Can you do it online? Do you offer it online? Do people do it online, brain spotting?
Yes, it can be done successfully online. I did all my trainings actually online. So I feel probably even a little bit more comfortable offering brain spotting online than in person. But it can be done both ways. So I'll bring my pointer out again. So, a client will kind of look at the pointer on screen online, but I often tell people if we're working together online, if your brain spot is outside of the screen, that's okay. Just go there and bring your focus there. If you're in person with me, there's a little bit more
Got it.
room, to kind of find the brain spot in the room. But I found that it can be done both ways. It's powerful both ways. And it just really depends on you, the client, what you're comfortable with.
And what clients, what kind of clients do you see in your practice?
I personally mainly work with adults. So I work with a lot of women, a lot of survivors of trauma. I have experience working with children and teens, but I don't currently. I have worked with couples in the past as well. And, brain spotting can work really with children, with adults, with couples. It works for a lot of people.
In a couple, would you have them both look at the wand at the same time? How does that work?
That's a good question. I don't do brain spotting with couples, so I don't have that training.
Yeah.
I know her name is Cherie Lindbergh. She does a lot of brain spotting for couples. I would imagine it would be more so that, let's say if there's a conflict that's happening in the relationship, both individuals would likely bring up that issue in their body and then maybe find their own brain spot for the activation they feel with that conflict together, which would be interesting.
I know. I'm like, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And vulnerable. Okay. Anything else on brain spotting that you feel like we absolutely need to know?
Good question. I don't think so. I love it. I think it's great. Look into it. If you're a therapist, if you're a client, I think it's great to maybe find somebody in your area that offers this. But I think the one thing that I will say is if you're looking for somebody that is brain spotting trained, just make sure that you ask them the right questions. Ask them where do they get their training, if they've done phase 1 and phase 2 at the very minimum. Just because I hate to say it, I've heard stories of people just watching a quick YouTube video on brain spotting and then thinking that they can offer this and not really doing good brain spotting work. So just make sure, you ask those questions of where they got trained and things like that.
Where you got certified, do they have a list of practitioners on there?
Yes. So if you go to brainspotting.com, that's kind of like the main website for brain spotting. For therapists that want to get trained, you can find like the list of all the trainings that are being offered throughout the world for that year. And then if you're a client wanting to, find a brain spotting therapist for yourself, there's a list, there's like a directory that states who's brain spotting certified, who's a consultant, that kind of thing on the website.
Awesome. Yay. And lastly, Janet, if people want to work with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm in LA. I'm in Encino, California, so the Valley of LA. You can find me on my website, roadtowellness.co. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Janet B. So feel free to reach out to me in one of those platforms. And if you're not local to the area in LA, we can, like I said, offer brain spotting virtually as well. So you can be anywhere in California to do it. And yeah, that's how you can find me.
That's awesome. Janet, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited. I'm like, I want to do this, and I am glad I like kind of know what it is. I had a memory, a flashback of like, wait, maybe I do know what this is. So
yeah,
thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you next time. And we'll put all that in the show notes for everyone so they can find you and work with you. Thanks. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope we gave you a new way to look at healing with brain spotting. So if you're curious, check out Janet's website for more. And if you are loving what you're hearing, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts so that we can continue to reach and help others. We'll see you next time.